Let's try a new stream. Hopefully, people will find it. They're looking for the old one. All right, I think you're live.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. This presentation is to review the court's order in Disability Rights Montana and AH versus Vidalin, a federal court order that we recently obtained in a class action lawsuit that expanded special education services to age 22. And we'll go through why we brought this action, the background of what occurred, a little bit of IDEA eligibility, just so folks understand who this order applies to and how students are made eligible for special education services under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. And then we'll walk through what the court order did and how it applies to students in Montana. And then we'll talk about the two groups of students that are impacted by this order. First are current students typically in high school that now have twice as much time, up to 8 years, to complete high school than they did before. And then the order is also retroactive, going back for 1 year. So we'll talk about what students who were improperly exited last year, in the 24-25 school year, need to do to get re-enrolled and continue to receive services. Finally, we'll talk about how to schedule an IEP meeting. IEPs are going to need to be updated pursuant to this order, and then what you can do if there's any trouble or questions. So to start, under the IDEA, which is a federal law that opened the door to special education services, students are supposed to be served up to age 22. But for years, Montana has operated under an exception, which cut special education services off for most students at age 18. For at least a decade, Disability Rights Montana has advocated at the legislature to try to change this, to bring Montana into compliance with federal law. Up through the time of the filing of this lawsuit in February of 2025, Montana was the last state in the country that did not expand services beyond age 18. So after a decade of asking for this change at the legislature with no results, we filed a class action lawsuit in federal court in District of Montana in February of 2025 to end this unlawful practice and bring Montana into compliance with IDEA. The state came to the table and agreed to what's called a consent judgment, which is a defendant agreeing to have a judgment entered against them in federal court. On August 13th, 2025, the court did enter that order and changed effectively the practice so that students with disabilities in Montana can now go to school up to age 22. On the left there, you'll see a copy of the heading of the court's order. So you could look that up and see the whole order. It's also linked on our website. So what changed? Now, after this court's order, Montana students who are eligible for IEPs, who have special education and related services, now have a legal right to continue in school until one of two things happen. Either the student graduates with a regular high school diploma, and we'll talk about what that means, or the student reaches the age of 22. Whichever happens first will end the student's availability or eligibility for special education services. So either they get to a regular high school diploma or they turn age 22, whichever one happens first. So I want to step back a little bit and talk about IDEA and eligibility just to do some level setting so everyone's on the same page. Again, IDEA is a federal law that requires the delivery of special education and related services to qualified students with disabilities through the development of what are called individual education programs tailored to each student's needs, or IEPs, and the implementation of those IEPs. IDEA was passed in 1975 after the near total exclusion of students with disabilities from public education. It also provided some funding to states to fund special education services. So up to 1975, Montana, like many other states, made it completely legal to totally exclude students with disabilities from public education. I'm not talking about partial segregation in separate schools, as was outlawed in Brown versus Board of Education. I'm talking about the complete and total exclusion of students with disabilities from public education, which was changed by IDEA in 1975. And the core principles of IDEA are that every student with a disability who's qualified is entitled to what's called a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. A free, appropriate public education means an education that is free, no cost to the parent, appropriate in that it allows the child to make progress in light of their circumstances along the general education curriculum, or if they can't proceed along the general education curriculum with equally challenging goals tailored to their individual needs to allow them to progress in their education. And then IDEA contains this least restrictive environment requirement, which generally means that students should be educated in the school that they would normally attend if they didn't have a disability, alongside their same age peers in regular education classrooms, unless that can't be accomplished satisfactorily for some reason based on the student's disability, not based on the school's administrative convenience or lack of resources. Who's covered under IDEA? So there's two parts of IDEA that are relevant here in terms of providing services. The first is Part C. Part C provides early intervention services for infants and toddlers. This case does not apply to Part C, to early intervention. This case is about what's called Part B, which is school-age children, age 3 to 22. Now, in Montana, it goes up to 22. IDEA Part B covers students with disabilities whose disability affects their ability to learn, such that they need a change to what they're taught or how they're taught. And we'll go into that in a little more detail. IDEA has no applicability in higher education. So in colleges, trade schools, two-year colleges, there is no special education and related services. There's no IEPs. And it has limited application in private and homeschool services. IDEA does provide a limited number of services to students in private schools and homeschools, but that typically looks like the public school pushing in some related services, some speech and language or occupational or physical therapy services, not a full individualized education program or IEP. How does a student become eligible for IDEA? First, they have to have one of these 13 categories of disability, and those cover any type of disability that really would be eligible under the ADA for protection, under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So that's not really the barrier that a student meets one of these 13 categories of disability, because those cover all the disabilities that are really conceivable, from autism to speech language impairments to physical disabilities to other health impairments like diabetes. That's not really the barrier. The barrier is the second and third point, that the disability has to adversely impact a student's educational performance, has to have a negative impact on their educational performance. And because of that disability, they need a change to what they're taught, which we call content, or how they're taught, which we call the methodology and delivery of instruction. So if they don't need changes to what or how they're taught, they're not eligible for an IDEA, IEP, an Individualized Education Program. They may be eligible for accommodations under the ADA or a law called Section 504, which we'll talk about in a minute, but they're not entitled to services under IDEA. So a student gets into this process by a comprehensive educational evaluation. That's the first step in the process. And to get a comprehensive educational evaluation, the student can be referred by school staff, by anybody who works for the school who has a concern that the student may need special education services. The student can be referred because the school identifies them as possibly having a disability or being of concern. The school also has an obligation to go out and find students who might have a disability and be qualified for services in what we call the child find obligation. And last but not least, a parent or an adult student themselves can ask for an evaluation for special education services. So if you're a parent and you recognize that there's something concerning about your student, you don't have to know exactly what the issue is. You just have to tell the school, I have a concern. Here's what my concern is. I'd like a special education comprehensive evaluation. For example, if you had a child who stays 6 and they're not able to identify numbers yet, you know that there's something developmentally that doesn't seem to be up to pace, that would be a reason to ask. Or if they're not communicating at that age, if they're having difficulty forming social relationships at that age, or engaging in imaginative play, those are things that might tell us, okay, here's a child who may have a disability. We don't need to know what that is. It's not our job as parents to be diagnosticians. It's our job to identify that there might be concern and raise it to the school and have that child evaluated. So the evaluation proceeds. There's a meeting to determine whether the student is eligible. And then if they're determined eligible, there's a whole process of developing the IEP, which we won't go into detail here today about. I do want to cover briefly the difference between 504 and Section 504 and the IDEA. So we talked about IDEA is sort of the smallest circle, if you look at that graphic on the left, of students, because they don't just have to have a disability, they also have to have an impact on educational performance such that they need a change to what or how they're taught. 504 is an anti-discrimination law, like the Americans with Disabilities Act, the major difference being that 504 only applies to entities that receive some type of federal financial assistance, whether that's federal money or other type of federal support. Whereas the ADA has no limitation on whether you need, whether the entity receives federal financial assistance. So all schools in the United States, all public schools receive some type of federal financial assistance. They're all going to be covered under Section 504. Some private schools also receive some federal financial assistance in the form of school free and reduced lunch programs or book subsidies or other things. But just because a student is in a private school doesn't necessarily mean they're not covered under Section 504. And the Americans with Disabilities Act is going to cover both public entities and many private entities, except for certain religious schools. So you see that little Venn diagram, the ADA being the biggest circle because it's not connected to federal funding, the smaller circle being 504, and because it's connected to federal funding, and then that smallest interior circle being IDEA. So a student who has a disability, but they don't need a change to what or how they're taught, may be eligible for accommodations under 504. Maybe they just need a modified PE assignment. Instead of going and running, they are doing a different type of exercise because of their disability. Or they need additional time on tests, but they don't need a change to the curriculum or the instructional methodologies. And the definition of disability under Section 504 is the same as the definition under the ADA. It's a substantial impairment of one or more major life activities. And we know from amendments to the ADA that the focus is not on the word substantial. The focus is there an impairment of one or more major life functions? And major life functions is very broad. It includes thinking, sleeping, eating, walking, the function of your bodily organs, etc. So turning into the court order in a little more depth, as I said, the court order expands services up to age 22. Now, it applies to every student with an IEP, regardless of disability category. It's not true that only students, say, with intellectual disabilities can go to school up until age 22. It is quite possible that a student who has no intellectual disabilities and is intellectually advanced, is a gifted and talented student, but has social deficits. They may need a little more time for services, and that's impacting their ability to complete their coursework on time. Or say a student who has dyslexia, no intellectual deficits in their ability to learn quickly or acquire new information, but it does change how fast they can go through material because their reading is slower. So they may not be able to get through high school in 4 years, even though they can go through the regular coursework. They can go from Algebra 1 to Algebra 2 to calculus. They just need more time to do that. And so that student might also be covered here. Most students with disabilities, whether they have IEPs or not, or have 504 or 88 accommodations, are going to be able to finish school with a regular high school diploma within 4 years. They're going to be able to progress along that regular curriculum. But some students are going to need more time, and that's really what this settlement does, is give those students who need additional time 4 more years to get it done, to get to a regular high school diploma, or get as far along the path as they can to be prepared for further education, employment, and independent living beyond high school. So now let's dive into the definition of a regular high school diploma, because this is really important. Remember, of those 2 criteria that are out there, one is you either reach age 22 and then you're cut off from services, or the second one is regardless of your age, whether you're 18 or 19 or 20 or 21 or 22, you achieve a regular high school diploma. So the definition of a regular high school diploma is really important. And federal law defines it as a diploma that is fully aligned with the state graduation requirements that most school students receive, most high school students receive. So that regular diploma that's based on state standards of having taken so many credits of math and so many credits of English and so many credits of science to graduate high school, that's the regular high school diploma. In Montana, sometimes you'll hear the term a diploma on IEP goals or a certificate on IEP goals, which just means the student has met their IEP goals up to that time. It does not mean that they have achieved a diploma that aligns with the state standards. So a student may not have done any of the required curriculum in terms of high school level math or high school level English, etc. They're just working up to their ability. Say it's a student who's 17 or 18, but their intellectual age is 10, or maybe they just read at a 5th grade level. They may not earn that high school level English proficiency necessary for a diploma, or progressing potentially in their education, just at a different pace. So the important thing is, if it's not a regular high school diploma, if it's a diploma on IEP goals or a certificate on IEP goals, that does not cut off eligibility. Say a student is going to earn a diploma on IEP goals at age 18, when their same age peers are rarely graduating, that student is still eligible for services because they haven't earned a regular high school diploma, and they can continue in school. So how do we know? It can be a little tricky to find out. if your student is graduating with a regular high school diploma. But there are a couple of things that we can do to make that very clear, and we're going to walk through that now. The first is that under IDEA, under the federal regulations for IDEA, a parent is entitled to a response from the school to a reasonable request for explanation and interpretations of the student's educational records. And a parent is broadly defined. That includes a parent who's a biological parent. It includes a foster parent, it includes a guardian. It includes the adult student if they're their own guardian. If they're not under guardianship and they're 18, they can ask for this themselves. And I would ask for that in writing. So you send an email to your case manager, to your principal, to the school special education director, and say, is my student, John, going to earn a regular high school diploma, and when? I'm asking for this as a reasonable request for explanation of the educational records. And if you want to put in the federal citation to the regulations, it's there, 34 CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, section 300.613. So you're entitled to that written response, and that should help clarify it. But there's also documentation in the IEP itself, which should also help clarify it. And the critical section is called the transition planning section of the IEP. All IEPs that are in place for a student who is going to be 16, the IEP that's going to be in place for when they're turned 16, has to have this transition planning section. So a lot of times you'll do an IEP in the spring and the student is 15, they're going to turn 16 the next school year. That IEP that you're doing starting when they're 15, because it's going to be in place for 1 year, has to have that transition planning section. Now it can start earlier. You can start at 14. For some students, you can start at 10 or 12 because they need a long pathway, glide path up to graduating or being ready at the end of their high school career for further education, employment, and independent living. But for most students, it's going to have transition planning section. It's going to start at around 16, maybe earlier. And it has to have, in that transition planning section of the IEP, it has to have a description of the coursework that the student will need and the services the student will need to assist them in reaching their post-secondary goals or goals after high school, which have to be identified through appropriate transition assessments in the process. So now there are different assessments focused on transition, focused on planning for work, planning for life skills, planning for independent living, planning for further education beyond high school, that are done at that time that inform the goals that the student might have. And these are the student's personal goals based on their strengths and their interests. So when you look at that transition planning section and you see that description of the coursework, it should be fairly evident whether the student is taking the coursework that is aligned to the state standards or not by looking at that. I'll show you a picture of what that looks like in a minute. Now, to avoid discrimination, schools are somewhat limited in how they can label coursework because they're not allowed to disclose through a child's or student's transcript that they have a disability. If you think about that transcript, it's going to follow that student to college, or a job may ask for a high school transcript. So they don't want to indicate on there that the student has a disability because they'd be disclosing confidential educational information about the student. So sometimes schools will code information or use euphemisms to indicate that a course is a modified special education course without using the phrase special education or disability in order to not out that student as having a disability. Words to look for in that situation are things like abbreviations like LS, which stands for life skills, or you might see the word consumer, or you might see the word functional. Those tend to indicate modified courses that don't meet regular state standards for graduation. Now, there's also a section on the transition IEP for graduation, and there are boxes that should be checked indicating, is the student going to graduate with a regular high school diploma this year? Are they expected to graduate next year with a high school diploma? Are they going to continue next year? Are they not expected to graduate at all with a regular high school diploma? And when is that going to happen? So here's a copy of a transition section IEP, a portion of a transition section IEP from a school student from the last year in Montana. And there are some things that are not legally accurate anymore now based on this new case resolution, this court order. So that's the section on high school graduation, and you'll see there's 3 parts. There are 3 checkboxes. They just happen to be split over multiple pages in this particular IEP. That first checkbox said the student is expected to graduate with a regular high school diploma at the end of the current school year. After graduating with a regular diploma, the student will not be entitled to special education services, as we've talked about. This action constitutes a change in educational placement, and documentation is included in the prior written notice. Upon graduation, the school district will provide the student with a summary of performance. So I want to cover a couple things there before I move on. First, it is a change in educational placement. So graduation with a regular high school diploma is a change in placement because the student's going to exit from school. And whenever there's a change in educational placement, the student and their parent is entitled to prior written notice under the IDEA, a document that says, this is what we plan to do. This is why we're planning to do it. These are the records that we're using and relying upon to make that decision. And that document, that prior written notice, is the basis for the student to know what's happening, but it's also the basis for the student and their parent to challenge the action of the school if they have to take the case to litigation, to a due process complaint. So that document's very important. If you're not seeing it, you may want to ask for one, although it's the school's obligation to provide it. But it's okay to say, can I have prior written notice of that decision? And the key word here is prior, right? It's not okay to give it afterwards. It should be done before the decision is made. So there's an opportunity to discuss, and there's an opportunity to challenge if the parent disagrees. So the second box says the student is not expected to graduate. They won't graduate with a regular high school diploma at the end of this year, and will return. They're going to come back the next year. The IEP team must develop an IEP for the next school year, right? Because they're not going to graduate. They're still eligible for services. We need to make a plan for next year. And again, this requires prior written notice. Now, the last box has some problems. It says the student is not expected to graduate with a regular high school diploma at the end of the school year. Okay. So the question there is, are they going to be age 22? Right? That's what changed. And it says here, the highlighted in yellow portion says the district will not provide special education services for the next school year due to the district's policy on the age through which educational services are available. Okay, that language is no longer appropriate because districts are not allowed to have their own policy. State requirements now require serve until age 22 unless the student has graduated with a regular high school diploma. So that language should probably be deleted. If you're seeing that language in an IEP, you should ask that question. What about the settlement in the AH versus Hedalin case? Doesn't my child get to go up to age 22 if they haven't graduated with a regular high school diploma? And if the school is arguing about that, ask for prior written notice or follow some of the dispute resolution processes we'll talk about at the end of this presentation. And again, you'll see highlighted in orange, this is a change of placement, right? So requires prior written notice. Graduating or exiting the student even without a regular high school diploma is still a change in placement, requires prior written notice. And then at the end, whether you graduate with a regular high school diploma or not, the law requires schools to give you a summary of performance. And that should set out what the student accomplished in terms of their IEP goals. So it kind of looks like a progress report, but it also would say, here's the casework or coursework that they've done and what they've accomplished. So in this next slide, you'll see just a snippet from the coursework section of a transition IEP. And I've redacted it just to keep students' information confidential. But you'll see it lays out at the top there their anticipated graduation date. So you should know, is it this year? Is it next year? Is it in 2 years? You should know there, it says credits earned to date. total credits needed for graduation. And that's referring to state standards for graduation. And in this case, in district standards, right? Because sometimes districts do have higher graduation requirements than the state sets. So some districts may go to 22 credits. There may not need by state standards to go up to 22 credits. And then you'll see the coursework that they're doing. This is just a small part of it. There's more coursework that's normally highlighted. So what courses are they going to take? In this particular IEP, you'll see all of these modified courses that are not courses aligned to state content standards, right? So LS, life skills communication, life skills, job skills. They're taking 2 courses of job skills. Life skills functional, there's that word, functional academics, right? So that's going to be a significantly modified academic course that may be doing, 4th or 3rd grade level math or English, not high school level math or English. Community is some type of life skills course, and independent living skills, right? So none of those coursework are courses that a non-disabled student would be taking in high school, right? There's no algebra there, there's no trigonometry, there's no physics, there's no AP English. Those are all modified courses for a student with a significant disability. So that would tend to indicate this student is not going to graduate with a regular high school diploma based on this trajectory. So next section, I want to talk about what schools in the state have to do to implement the court's order. And the first thing that the state of Montana, the Office of Public Instruction, had to do was provide notice to the school district and a guidance document. And OPI already did that on August 29th. In mid-August, they published a guidance document. It's on their website. There's a hyperlink there. And it walked through the court's order, much like I'm doing now, and informs districts of what the new requirements are and what school districts need to do to implement those requirements. Now, that guidance document is not optional. It is a binding guidance document. School districts must follow it. At the end of that document, there's 2 forms. There's a notice form, a notice of continued offer of faith, and I've copied it there on the left-hand side. And that is a notice to students who were exited last year during the 2024-2025 school year, who were exited improperly. They didn't earn a regular high school diploma, and they weren't yet 22, and yet they were still exited from high school. Those students get to go back, okay? And their schools were required to identify them right now and send them this notice in the mail that says that you are eligible for continuing services, but you need to fill out an enrollment form to re-enroll in school and get continuing services. And you only have 30 days from the date you've received this notice to do that. Now, schools are identifying the students who might be eligible based on a particular exit code they use in their data management system. It is quite possible that schools make mistakes here and that students don't receive notices because the school misidentified that they were a part of this class of students who were eligible for continuing services and didn't give them the appropriate notice. So I want to encourage people, do not wait for this notice to come in the mail. Go ahead and go to this guidance document, click on the link, download the enrollment form, which is on the next slide, fill it out and return it to the school you last attended. So OPI also has to provide ongoing training and technical assistance to parents and schools about the requirements of the court order and incorporate this into their regular training process. They also have to ensure that students who are actually eligible for services, both from last year and going forward, receive those services that they're entitled to. And OPI is required to monitor compliance. Schools have to report to OPI that the students from last year were notified, who were notified, whether or not they were served and elected to re-enroll. And then they also have to incorporate these new requirements into their ongoing cyclical monitoring of schools going forward on a regular basis. So now I want to talk about that first group of students, the students from 2024, 2025 from last year, who are entitled to ongoing services but need to re-enroll. On the left there, you'll see the re-enrollment form. It's just one page. It's very simple. It just says your name, your contact information, I wish to re-enroll, and a signature. And the student, if they're 18 and not under guardianship, they should sign this because they're an adult. It's their legal right to re-enroll, so they should sign it. Now, if they're under guardianship, the parent or guardian should sign it as well, but I would still have the school sign it. So there's only one line there. Just go ahead and sign right next to it as a parent, and have the student sign, regardless of their ability. If they only use a mark or a stencil or a stamp to make their normal signature, that's just fine. That's a legal signature if that's what they intend as their signature. So if they just make a mark or use their stamp, that's sufficient. And then the school district information, what school district they are entitled to receive a free public education from. So go ahead and write that information down. And again, the form should be filled out when you get it. But if you didn't get it and you're sending it in on your own, then where it says date this form was sent to student by school district, I would write in this form was not sent to to the child by the school district. To the student by the school district. I am filling this out on my own and date it. Okay, now I want to reemphasize the student only has 30 days from the date they receive that notice to re-enroll. Most students should be receiving that notice this last week in August of 2025 or the first week in September here. So be looking out in the mail. And if you don't get it by the end of this week, go ahead and send out the form immediately. We've covered all this. Again, don't wait and document your work. I strongly suggest that you copy this form, you scan it, sign it, scan it in, send it by email with a confirmation of receipt, and confirm that you received it, and confirm that you're saving a copy for yourself so that if you have to enforce your rights, you have a copy of an email proving that you sent it. Another option would be to send it certified mail return receipt requested, and keep copies of the return receipt, keep copies of the correspondence, any correspondence you have related to this. So now moving on to the second group of students, and those are students who were not exited, right? They are students this year. They're still in high school. They're still under the age of 22. They weren't exited last year. They have ongoing eligibility for services. Now, these students should not need to re-enroll. They should already be enrolled and starting school this week or last week and going forward. But they're not expected to earn a regular high school diploma. So they're going to need some more time. They can go up to age 22. What's critical for these students is that they're going to need to have an IEP meeting, because at the end of last year, when their IEP was created, they didn't have the right to go to school until age 22, and now they do. So now the team needs to meet and make a new plan for what services and coursework they're going to do now that they have additional time. And if you think about that, that's double the amount of time that they had before. So there should be significantly more work and significantly more challenging goals because they have all this more time to do it. So you need to request an IEP. Both the students from last year who are going to re-enroll and the students from this year should be requesting an IEP. For the students from last year who are re-enrolling, the court order requires the school to reconvene an IEP meeting within 30 days of re-enrollment. But again, don't wait for the school to do that. Affirmatively send an email requesting an IEP meeting. And for students who weren't disenrolled, they're continuing students already eligible for ongoing services, they also need to have a new IEP meeting to make sure that the team discusses it and make any amendments to their IEP. Now, it's most pressing for students who are seniors this year because we want to get right on the ball and make a plan. We've got 4 more years now and we only planned for 4 initial years, so we've got to get on it. Students who are freshmen, there's a little more time. So if you meet a little bit later in the semester, or even at the beginning of the second semester, just based on the student needs and how much planning we need to do, that might be okay. But for seniors, I wouldn't wait. I would go ahead and make a request for an IEP meeting immediately and ask for a meeting within 30 days. On the slide there, I have the citation. The federal commentary on the IDEA regulations makes it very clear that a parent can request an IEP meeting at any time. So again, you want to document your work. You want to send this by email to the student's IEP manager or case manager. That's going to be in the top right corner of the first page of their IEP. It's going to say who their case manager is. And I would normally send it to the principal, building principal, and to the district special education director. In a really small district, I would send it to the superintendent too, because sometimes the superintendent serves that role as the special education administrator, or even the special education case manager. So making sure you send it to that superintendent as well. And in a big district like Missoula or Helena or Kalispell, it's less necessary to send it to the superintendent, but you definitely want to send it to the special education director. Again, keep copies of all this correspondence, of all the emails that you send, and send them with a return receipt on your email. So I want to talk about what happens if things go bad. If the school is giving you any trouble about, one, giving you information, whether, it's about whether the student will graduate with a regular high school diploma and when, if they're giving you trouble about scheduling an IEP meeting, if they're telling you this student isn't eligible, they don't go, that's not our policy, we don't go to age 22. If they're claiming the student graduated with a regular high school diploma and they clearly didn't, those are all things that could come up here. And your first contact needs to be to the Office of Early Assistance, the Early Assistance Program at the Office of Public Instruction. The court order requires them to provide technical assistance and work through these issues. Their phone number is area code 406-444-2046. Again, 406-444-2046. And they should hopefully help you work through those problems. If you contact OPI and you're still not getting anywhere, there's still a problem, you have a couple of options. At that point, you could file what's called an IDEA state complaint. And again, you'd be filing that with the Office of Dispute Resolution at OPI. There's forms on their website for how to do this. It is not a complicated process, particularly in this limited issue. You do not need an attorney to do it. It doesn't hurt to have an attorney, but you don't need an attorney. It's not like court litigation. You're filing a complaint, an administrative complaint with OPI, and they're required by law to go out and investigate it. And if they find that there's been a non-compliance, they're required to issue corrective action order to the school and enforce that compliance. So that would be one option. You can file what's called a due process complaint, but that's much more complicated. That would be difficult to do without an attorney. It is an administrative lawsuit that looks much like litigation in court. So we aren't recommending that people go ahead and file due process complaints, but they may need to file a state complaint, an administrative state complaint. If you've worked through the process with OPI and you're not getting results and the student isn't being given appropriate services under this court order, then it's time to call Disability Rights Montana. We have very limited resources right now, so I ask that you go through the OPI process first before contacting us, and know that we're not going to be able to take every individual case. But we do want to know if there's problems in this process. Our phone number is 406-449-2344, and my email address is up there. It's TAL, T-A-L, T like Tom, A like Apple, L like Long, at dr-mt.org. Now, I want to just reinforce, for purpose of disclaimer, that having attended this presentation does not create an attorney-client relationship with Disability Rights Montana, and it's not an offer of any legal or advocacy services at this point. If you have questions, again, contact OPI, and if that doesn't work out, contact Disability Rights Montana. Thank you for attending this presentation, and I'm hopeful that students get the rights, the services they're entitled to, and this settlement of this class action lawsuit has made a significant impact on Montana students.